There is a story that almost every abandoned child gets told, and most of us never once think to question it, because we were too young to have been there, and the only witnesses left were the adults who stayed. The adults who stayed get to write the story, and the story they write, however gently, always has the same shape, that the one who left chose to. I was 6 years old when my mother left us. The story I was handed was the simplest one there is. She chose to go. I believed that story for 33 years, and I stopped believing it on an ordinary afternoon a few months ago when I turned over a single old photograph and read what my mother had written on the back of it. What she wrote did not match one word of the story I had carried my whole life, and it sent me to my father with a question I had never thought to ask, and his answer took the central wound of my childhood and revealed it to be something else entirely. My name is Erin Caldwell. I am 40 years old, and I work as an occupational therapist in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I help people relearn how to live in their own lives after something is broken, which is, I have come to see, exactly what I spent this past year doing for myself. My mother died a few months ago. I am going to tell you what she wrote on the back of that photograph. But first you have to understand the story I grew up inside, the story of the mother who left. I was 6 when she went. I have only fragments of actual memory from that time, a child's scraps. What I have instead, in place of memory, is the story, repeated and settled and hardened over decades into something I experienced as simple fact. The story was this. My mother, Lynn, left our family when I was 6 years old. She went away, and she did not really come back, not in any way that counted. My father, Gary, raised me alone from then on, and he did it well, and I never doubted his love for a second. But the shape of my childhood was a shape with a hole in it, a mother-shaped hole, and the explanation I absorbed for that hole, never stated cruelly, my father was never cruel about her, but absorbed all the same from 100 small silences and sad looks, was that my mother had chosen to leave, that she had wanted a different life than the one that had us in it, that she was, in the end, a woman who could walk away from her own small daughter, and had. I want to be fair to my father here, because he was not a man who badmouthed her. He never sat me down and called my mother names. If anything, he went quiet whenever she came up, changed the subject, looked away. But a child reads silence even better than speech. The careful way the adults around me avoided her, the sad pause whenever her name surfaced, the absence of any photograph of her in our house, all of it told a 6-year-old, and then a 16-year-old, and then a 26-year-old, the same wordless thing. She is gone. She chose to be gone, and we do not talk about why. No one ever actually said, "Your mother abandoned you." They did not have to. The silence said it for them, every day, for 33 years. I want to tell you what it does to a person to grow up believing that, because it does not stay in childhood. It comes with you. A child who believes her mother chose to leave her grows into an adult who carries a particular, specific wound. The belief that she is, at some fundamental level, leavable. That she was, once, something a mother looked at and walked away from. I carried that. It made me anxious in love, certain that anyone who got close enough would eventually do what she had done. And it did something else. Something I am only now naming. It made me afraid of myself. Because if my mother was the kind of woman who could abandon her child, and I was her daughter, then what was in her might be in me. When I became an adult, when I thought about having children of my own, that fear sat in me like a stone, the fear that I had inherited some hidden capacity to leave. My mother's supposed choice did not just take a mother from me, it put a crack in my own foundation that I carried for 33 years. And as for my mother herself, she stayed distant my whole life, a few stiff phone calls a year, a near stranger I felt no warmth toward and assumed felt none toward me. When she died a few months ago, I grieved, but it was a thin, complicated, guarded grief. You do not know how to mourn someone you believe chose to leave you. I did not go to her in her final illness. I want to confess that, because it is part of the weight I now carry. When word came that she was failing, I told myself I was too busy, that we had no real relationship, that it would be hypocritical to rush to the bedside of a woman who had walked out on me. The truth underneath those excuses was simpler and uglier. I was still 6 years old where she was concerned, still the abandoned child, and I would not give her the comfort of my presence because she had not given me hers. So, she died without me there. I have to live with that now, knowing what I know, that I withheld myself from my dying mother as a punishment for a crime she never committed. The story we believe does not just shape how we feel, it shapes what we do, and what we fail to do, sometimes irreversibly. After she died, her few belongings came to me. She had not had much, and there was no one else. It was a small box, and I almost did not go through it carefully. What could a woman who had abandoned me have left that I needed? But I sat down with it one afternoon, and near the bottom, wrapped in a square of cloth as though it were the most fragile thing she owned, was a single photograph. The smallness of the box struck me before anything else did. My mother had reached the end of a whole life, and what she left fit in a container I could carry under one arm. A few clothes, some papers, a worn paperback. The ordinary residue of a quiet, contained existence. The life, I had assumed, of a woman who had cut herself loose from everyone and drifted through the decades attached to no one. I remember feeling, sorting through it, a flicker of something almost like vindication. See, this is what becomes of a woman who leaves her child, a small box and a faraway grave. I am ashamed of that flicker now, because the cloth-wrapped photograph at the bottom of that box was about to tell me that the woman I was quietly judging had spent 33 years carrying the one thing she could not bear to be parted from. And it was me. It was a photo of the two of us, me at about 6, in my mother's arms, and both of us were laughing. Really laughing, heads tipped together, the easy, helpless laughter of a mother and a small child who adore each other. I did not remember the moment at all, but I sat there staring at it, at this image of obvious, uncomplicated love between a woman and the daughter she would supposedly abandon within the year, and something in me would not line up. I studied my own small face in that photograph for a long time. The child in my mother's arms was not wary, not braced, not held at any distance. She was thrown back in total, trusting delight, the way a child only laughs with someone she feels completely safe with. Whatever else was true, that little girl in the picture had not been afraid of her mother and had not been unloved by her. The body does not lie at 6, and the woman holding her was not performing for a camera. Her laughter was as helpless and real as the child's. Two people caught in a moment of pure, safe joy. I had been told my whole life that this woman would soon prove she did not care for this child. The photograph in my hands was the first piece of evidence I had ever held that flatly refused to agree. This was not a photograph of a woman who did not want her child. And it had been wrapped in cloth, kept and protected and carried, I would learn, through 33 years and every move of her life. A woman does not guard like a treasure the photograph of a child she chose to leave. And then I turned it over. I want you to understand the feeling in that moment, before I read a single word, because it was the feeling of a foundation shifting. For 33 years, I had held two facts as equally solid. My mother chose to leave me, and my mother did not love me. They had always seemed like the same fact, two sides of one coin, but the photograph in my hand was evidence that did not fit. The laughing faces, the cloth wrapping, the careful keeping across 3 decades, and every move of a hard life. You cannot hold a photograph like that, kept like that, and go on believing it belonged to a woman who felt nothing. Something was wrong with my story. I could feel it before I had any idea what. And so, my hand turned the photograph over almost on its own, looking for an explanation, and found one I was in no way prepared for. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, younger handwriting, the hand of a woman in her 20s, were these words. I have them memorized. They said, I knew it was her hand at once. I had seen it on the few birthday cards that had arrived over the years, the stiff, dutiful ones I had barely read. But this was that same handwriting from much longer ago, looser, younger, written by a woman not much older than I had been at my own wedding. And it had been written, I could tell, in a hurry and through tears. Some of the letters were unsteady, one word slightly smeared. This was not a caption added calmly years later. This was something set down in a single, difficult moment. The moment, I would come to understand, just before everything in my life changed. I steadied the photograph in both hands, and I read it. My Aaron, I am going away so that the thing that is wrong with me cannot reach you. I am so sick right now, my love, in a way you are too little to understand, and I am terrified of what I might become near you. Leaving you is the hardest and the most loving thing I have ever done. I will get better far away from you, where I can't hurt you. Please, when you are grown, forgive me. I did not leave because I didn't want you. I left because I wanted you safe, and I was the danger. I will love you every single day. Mom. I sat on my floor with that photograph in my shaking hands. I did not understand, not fully, not yet. But I understood enough to know that the story I had carried for 33 years was not the true one. So the next morning, I drove to my father's house, and I put the photograph down on his kitchen table, face down, with my mother's writing showing, and I asked him to finally tell me the truth. I barely slept that night. I read those few lines on the back of the photograph over and over until I had them by heart. And each time I read them, a different piece of my childhood rearranged itself. The thing that is wrong with me. I am the danger. I left because I wanted you safe. These were not the words of a woman who did not want her child. They were the words of a woman in terror, not of her daughter, but of herself, for her daughter's sake. And somewhere in the small hours, I understood that there was a whole story I had never been told, a reason behind the leaving that the 6-year-old had never been given, and the 40-year-old had never thought to ask for. My father was the only person left alive who knew it, and I had spent 33 years not asking him, because I had been so certain there was nothing to ask. The story was settled. She left. The end. So I waited for morning, and I drove over, and for the first time in my life, I asked. And my father, who is 70 now, and had carried this alone for 33 years, put his head in his hands, and then he told me everything. The truth was that my mother had been gravely ill. Not in her body, in her mind. In the year before she left, she had become very sick, with something serious and frightening, the kind of illness that, in those days especially, no one knew how to name to a 6-year-old, and that families hid out of shame and fear. My father told me about a mother I had never been allowed to know, a young woman terrified by what was happening inside her own head, convinced, in the grip of her illness, that she had become a danger to the child she loved most. He told me that she had not been taken from us by choice. She had gone away to be cared for, to get treatment, somewhere far enough that the part of her that frightened her could not reach me. And she had made him promise something. She had made him promise that he would keep me safe, and that he would not poison me against her, but also, and this is the part that broke both of us at that table, she had told him that if she could not get well enough to come back whole, it would be better for me to believe she had simply left than to grow up watching my mother be that sick. She chose, in her illness and her love, to let me think she had abandoned me, rather than let me carry the truth of how ill she was. My father had spent 33 years honoring the promise of a frightened, sick young woman and protecting me from a truth he was never sure I could hold. My father cried at that table in a way I had never seen him cry, and he told me he had questioned the promise 1,000 times over 33 years. He had not known if he was doing right. There were nights, he said, when he had nearly told me everything, when he had watched me grow up sad and guarded and convinced I was leavable, and had thought that maybe the truth, however hard, would hurt me less than the lie. But every time he had come back to the thing my mother had begged him for, in the worst days of her illness. Let her be safe, and let her be ordinary. Don't make her childhood about my sickness. He had decided, rightly or wrongly, that a daughter who believed her mother left was at least a daughter who could grow up without the shadow of that illness over every day. And he had carried the real story alone, for both of us, for 3 decades, never certain it was the right call. I looked at my 70-year-old father across that table and understood that he had not been hiding the truth from me. He had been carrying it for me, the way you carry something too heavy to hand to a child. I want to tell you what the photograph and my father's truth did to 33 years of my own history, because it rebuilt it from the foundation up. Every single thing I believed about my own beginning was the negative of the truth. My mother had not been a woman who could leave her child. She had been a woman so destroyed by the fear of harming her child that she tore herself away to protect her. The most agonizing act of love I have ever heard described, dressed up by her own choice as its opposite. And the crack she had supposedly put in my foundation, the fear that I had inherited some capacity to abandon, simply vanished because there had never been any abandonment to inherit. I want to dwell on that for a moment because it is the part that healed something I did not know was still bleeding. For my whole adult life, whenever I had been afraid to commit, afraid to fully love, afraid I would one day simply walk out on a life the way I believed my mother had, I had located the source of that fear in her. She was the flaw I might carry. And the photograph took the flaw and revealed it as its mirror image. The woman I had been afraid of becoming had not been weak or selfish or cold. She had been the bravest and most self-sacrificing kind of mother there is. If I had inherited anything from her at all, it was not a capacity to leave. It was a capacity to love so much that I would put a child's well-being above my own heart. That is not an inheritance to fear. That is one to be proud of. What my mother had actually passed to me, it turned out, was the opposite of what I feared. A capacity for a love so fierce it would sacrifice its own happiness for a child's safety. I had spent 33 years afraid I was the daughter of a woman who could leave. I was, in fact, the daughter of a woman who left precisely because she could not bear to do harm. Those are not the same inheritance. They are opposites, and I had been carrying the wrong one my entire life. I keep coming back to the fear I had carried about myself, the quiet dread, all through my 20s and 30s, that I had inherited some hidden capacity to abandon, that becoming a mother myself might unlock in me whatever had let my mother walk away. I had let that fear shape real decisions. I had been slow to trust my own steadiness, slow to believe I would stay, because somewhere in me lived the daughter of a woman who hadn't. And it had all been built on a falsehood. The photograph did not just exonerate my mother, it exonerated me, retroactively, going back to childhood. I was not the daughter of a leaver. I had never had any dark inheritance to fear, and I sat with the strange grief of realizing how much of my own life I had lived carefully, defensively, braced against a flaw in myself that had never existed, because of a story about my mother that had never been true. And the distance, her lifelong, painful distance from me, which I had always read as proof of her indifference, that too turned over and became its opposite. My father explained it, and the photograph confirmed it. My mother had gotten somewhat better over the years, enough to live a quiet life far away. But she had never come back to me, not really, and I had always taken her absence as a final confirmation that she had simply never wanted me. The truth was that she had stayed away out of a terrible, mistaken shame, convinced that I believed she had abandoned me, certain that I must hate her, sure that her reappearance would only damage the stable life my father had built for me. She had loved me from a distance for 33 years, kept a photograph of me wrapped in cloth, and never reached for me because she believed she had forfeited the right. We had spent my entire life as two people who loved each other across a chasm, each of us certain the other one had done the leaving. And now she was dead, and I had the photograph, and it was too late to cross. My father told me she had asked about me over the years. Quietly, through him, never directly to me, she would call him sometimes, he said, just to ask how I was doing, whether I was happy, what I had become. She knew I had become an occupational therapist. She knew I had married. She knew, it turned out, a great deal about a life she believed she had no right to enter. She had been watching me from the far side of the chasm the whole time, the way you watch a lit window from out in the cold, and she had never once knocked because she was certain the door was locked against her. And the most unbearable part is that it was not. If she had ever knocked, if she had ever risked one direct call, one letter, one visit, I do not know what the 6-year-old in me would have done. But the adult might have answered. We will never know now. She protected me right out of her own life, and then she protected me right out of her death, and the chasm she kept us on opposite sides of turned out to have no real river running through it at all. I want to be honest about the grief, because the photograph gave me back my mother and took her away in the same instant. Because the cruelest fact in all of this is the timing. For 33 years I could have known. My mother was alive for most of them, living her quiet, faraway life, loving me and believing I hated her, and I was here, believing she had abandoned me and feeling nothing warm in return. One honest conversation, at any point in 3 decades, could have dissolved the entire misunderstanding and given us years together. But the truth was locked behind a frightened young woman's promise, and a loving father's silence, and a 6-year-old's hardened story, and none of us ever found the door. And now she is gone, and I am holding the photograph she kept of us laughing, reading the words she wrote to a daughter she was sure she had lost, and I cannot tell her that I finally know, that I finally understand, that I forgive her completely, and that there was never anything to forgive. The hardest part of the truth arriving is when it arrives one conversation too late. A few months have passed now since I turned that photograph over. I have made a kind of peace, and I will tell you what it is built on. I cannot tell my mother that I know, but I can let what she did finally work. She tore herself out of my life, believing it would keep me safe and whole, and the deepest way I can honor that, I have decided, is to actually be whole, to stop being the leavable daughter with the cracked foundation, because that daughter was based on a lie, and to become instead what I really am, the well-loved child of a woman who gave up her own daughter's arms rather than risk doing her harm. I had the photograph framed, the front, the 2 of us laughing, and it hangs in my home now where I see it every day. But I taped a copy of the back, of her words, just behind it, so that the laughing picture and the true reason are always together, the way they always should have been. My children will grow up knowing their grandmother not as the woman who left, but as the woman who loved so hard it cost her everything. That is the inheritance I am passing down now, the true one. I did one more thing, a few weeks ago, that I need to tell you about. I drove to where my mother is buried, a place I had never once visited, in a town I had avoided my whole life, and I stood at her grave, and I did the thing I could not do while she was alive, the thing the timing had stolen from us both. I told her that I knew, out loud, to the stone. I told her that I had found the photograph, that I had read the back, that I understood now what leaving me had cost her, and why she had done it. I told her she had not failed me, that she had loved me so ferociously she had made the most terrible sacrifice a mother can make, and that I was not the abandoned daughter she had died believing she left behind. I told her I forgave her, and that there had never been anything to forgive. The stone did not answer, but I had needed to say it more than I had needed her to hear it. Some conversations you have to have even when they can only go one direction. I want to leave you with the 2 things this taught me. The first is about the stories we are handed as children and how rarely we reopen them. When something painful happens to a child, the adults who remain become the authors of what it meant. And they write the simplest version they can, often to protect the child, sometimes to protect themselves. And the child takes that version and hardens it into fact and carries it for a lifetime, never thinking to ask whether the 6-year-old's understanding was the whole truth. I carried "my mother chose to leave" for 33 years and never once interrogated it, because it had been installed in me before I was old enough to question anything. So if there is a defining story from your own childhood about who left, who failed, who did not love you, I am asking you to consider that you may have been handed a child's version of an adult's complicated truth. The story you were given at 6 does not have to be the story you die believing. Sometimes it is worth turning the photograph over. The second thing is harder, and it is this. Not everything that looks like abandonment is abandonment. My mother's leaving looked, for 33 years, exactly like rejection, and it was the precise opposite, a love so protective it disguised itself as its own enemy. People leave for reasons we cannot see, carrying illnesses and fears and impossible choices we know nothing about, and a child especially cannot tell the difference between a parent who left because they did not care and a parent who left because they cared too much to stay. So, before you let someone's leaving become the proof that you were unlovable, consider that you may never have known the real reason at all. The one who walked away may have been walking toward your safety, not away from your worth. Not everyone who leaves is leaving you. If this story landed for you, drop the word snapshot in the comments below. I read them. It tells me which stories are worth telling next. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one before I go. First, the story you were handed as a child is not always the whole truth, and you are allowed to reopen it. When something painful happens to us young, the adults who stay become the authors of what it meant, and they write the simplest version they can, and we harden it into fact and carry it for decades without ever asking whether a child's understanding was complete. If there is a defining wound from your childhood, about who left you, who failed you, who did not love you, consider that you were given a 6-year-old's version of a grown-up's complicated truth. That version is not a life sentence. Sometimes, the most freeing thing you can do is turn the photograph over and look at what was actually written there. Second, not everything that looks like leaving is rejection. People walk away carrying reasons we cannot see. Illnesses, fears, impossible choices made out of a love so protective it wears the mask of its opposite. A child cannot tell the difference between a parent who left because they did not care and one who left because they cared too much to risk staying. So, before you let someone's departure become your proof that you were not worth staying for, consider that you may never have known the real reason. The person who walked away may have been protecting you, not abandoning you. Not everyone who leaves is leaving you. This story touched on a parent's mental illness, which is a tender subject for many. If it stirred something in your own life, please be gentle with yourself and reach out to someone you trust. You do not have to carry it alone. Not everyone who leaves is leaving you. I'll see you next time.